Hello, my name is Denisa Kostovicova, and I will be presenting the article that I co-authored with Vesna Popovski. The article is titled Women's Discursive Agency in Transitional Justice, a Feminist Institutionalist Perspective. With this article, we intervene in the scholarship on gendered transitional justice. In other words, we are looking at what women can do to enact change so the transitional justice takes account of specific needs for justice associated with women and women's experience of conflict. So we know that there is a big body of literature that looks at women's agency in the context of national and transnational civil society activism. We know a great deal about women's participation in peace processes and their attempts to make change, and women's participation in transitional justice instruments such as war crime courts and truth commissions. However, there is a huge gap in the scholarship in that we know very little about how women participate in transitional justice policy making in national parliaments. And this is the gap that we address in our research by looking at women's agency and specifically at women's discursive agency. To look at women's discursive agency that foregrounds discourse when it tries to investigate how women can make transformation, we pool two distinct scholarships. The first scholarship that we bring into dialogue is the scholarship on feminist institutionalism that has investigated masculine domination in parliaments and specifically looked at the role of different norms and practices that construct and perpetuate men's domination of parliaments over women, resulting in women's marginalization. We bring this scholarship into dialogue with a scholarship that deals with gender and language. Specifically, we look at feminist theories of gender and language that critically investigate the differences that men and women exhibit in their language use and discourse. These are not innate differences. Rather, these differences can be constructed in different communities of practice. And therefore, what we are looking at, following Eckert and McConnell-Ginnett, we're trying to observe closely different linguistic and gender practices and how they operate in the context of specific communities of practice, and how different gender differences and gender patterns can be constructed through different interactional strategies in these communities of practice, of which parliament are an example. We're also interested in not just how these gendered patterns can be constructed, but also how they can be dismantled. So we conceptualize women's discursive agency from two perspectives. First, we looked at micro-level interactional dimension of discourse. What this means is that we know that adversarialness is a prominent feature of discourse in the parliament. So what we set out to argue is that if we want to conceptualize women's discursive agency, we have to look at this micro-level interactional dimension. In other words, we need to investigate how women orient to this norm of adversarialness, and we investigate directness, which is a feature of discourse as it expressed in the syntax, and which indicates whether women are direct, adversarial, in other words, behave more in a more masculine way than it is argued in the literature, which says that women are more indirect and tend to be more polite, and capture their agency through investigating this micro level of interaction. However, this is not the only way that we can conceptualize and comprehensively understand agency. Agency has to be also understood in relation to micro level normative discourses. Why is this so? It is important to look at these micro-level normative structures, such as partisanship, ideology, and nationalism, because all of these discursive micro-level structures can also constrain women's ability to promote justice that recognizes women's needs. What we do in our article, we study the Croatian case study. Croatia is a typical case of gender justice in a post-conflict country, having emerged from a war fought between Croats and Serbs in the early 1990s. However, it's a society which there is a strong, dominant ethno-nationalist narrative of the conflict that constructs sort of the hierarchy of victims that needs to be acknowledged, giving primacy to ethnic Croatian victims. This case study is also a case study that of gender justice, in a sense that it is not just ethnic Croatian victims that are receiving primacy, but also primacy is given to men in terms of their entitlements. Similarly, when we look at the Croatian parliament, typically, both of Western and Northwestern context, this is a parliament where we have had persistent numerical domination of men over women. So in this context, how can women's voice be heard, and how can women enact transformation? So what we've done is we've analyzed 390 parliamentary questions about transitional justice, applying a multimodal discourse analysis, combining conversation analysis, which allows us to capture this interactional dimension of speech, directness, and combined it with critical discourse analysis, a qualitative approach in which we investigated how women engage with these macro level structures, such as partisanship, ideology, and nationalism. What we found, contrary to some expectations from the literature that women tend to be more polite, we find that women's parliamentary questions in the Croatian parliament are as adversarial as men's. However, this adversarialism that we captured at a micro level of interaction also opens up space to insert distinctive content into their questions. So from our qualitative analysis of questions that we conduct comparatively, comparing women's and men's questions, we find that women broadened the transitional justice agenda and address justice needs of different social groups, of women, of children, of teachers, of national minorities. Women circumvent the constraints of partisanship. They advance feminist transitional justice by granting recognition to victims, women victims of wartime violence, as opposed to men who use this issue instrumentally. However, we also find that the constraints of nationalism are less easily broken. So what are the takeaways of our study? First, our study shows that we can evaluate women's voice in institutions and provide new evidence of how women can challenge gendered structures, such as those structures in the parliaments. So we find that women are as adversarial as men, which opens political space for dismantling of masculine hegemony of transitional justice policymaking. Our research also has broader implications and wider impact. Theoretically, we point to a need for further rigorous empirical evaluation of other mixed-sex interactions in transitional justice, both in formal and informal settings. And also, our research has direct policy implications in that we can point to the opportunities to train female MPs to recognize the connection between language and their political power, which is actually the essence of women's discursive agency and their ability to enact change. Thank you.